Hi, I'm Elizabeth. This is the Bookish North. Welcome to my first video of this year's Sagalong. So Sagalong is by now a yearly event. This is the third year in a row it's been happening, and I've participated all years because I love the sagas. And this is the second year. I'm also one of the hosts. So this year I'm joined by 8 other great booktubers, and you will see their names on the screen. And I will also, of course, leave links in the description box to all of their channels, so please go check them out. Today we are all going to be talking about the saga that we are reading this year, which is Njåls saga. So this is one of the longest, it is the longest of the Icelandic sagas. It comes in at about 300 pages in my Norwegian edition of this. And we have divided this into 4 parts, and we will be talking about it today and the next 3 upcoming Saturdays. So today it's all about chapters 1 to 40 in this. So Njåls saga, in addition to being the longest of the Icelandic sagas, is also the one that is handed down to us in the most copies of handwritten documents. It is presumed to have been written around 1280 by an anonymous author. The oldest of the fragments we have handed down to us in handwritten form is from around 1300, so only 20 years older than the first writing down of the tale. The events taking place in the story, however, are much older, and from around 950 to about 1015, I think, about 2 generations. Being covered. And as always with sagas, it is impossible to divide fact from fiction. It's sure to have a historical base and events that has taken place, and the anonymous author of this is clearly a person that has done a great deal of research, done a lot of reading, and also have had access to sources that are now lost to us. We can see certain things clearly, like that I'm saying he because probably it is a he, but we see that we see a clear influence from, for instance, Laxdøla saga. That was one of the sagas we read last year, but it's also presumed to have as its source other sagas that we no longer have access to, and also of course a rich oral tradition that also will by now be lost. But this is also clearly a work of literature where various different tales have been brought together in this one mixed story, so to speak. And there's a lot of literary devices and stuff going on here, so I mean, let's call it historical fiction and say that it has a core of history in it, but there's also a lot of fiction, and now, so many centuries later, it is hard to keep them apart. But I really enjoy reading the sagas, and one of the things I like to read is to try to suss out how things were like back then. And I mean, even if things didn't necessarily happen just like this, it gives us a look into certain things in society, and that is one of the things I really enjoy about reading these kind of stories. So I always have a hard time getting into the sagas because there are so many angles you can take, so many ways in, and also there is so many things happening at once because they're not necessarily linear stories like a lot of novels. It's hard because it's just this plethora of stories meshed into one, and there are so many people in this book. I mean, so many names. At least my edition has this name list in the back that lets you know where you can find the various people, and this name list alone runs 15 pages long. But one of the first things I learned when reading sagas is that names are ignorable to a large extent. You don't have to remember all of these people to enjoy the stories, and usually you fairly quickly grasp which ones you need to latch on to, and you get to know these people, and all of the others you can sort of just let fly by unless you want to do otherwise. I do find when you're reading multiple sagas, you start seeing people, you start recognizing people, and you see the interconnectedness of them, and I really enjoy that aspect of it. But I do sort of skim when they get into these long genealogies for every single character introduced. I mean, they're not there for me as a modern day reader, they were there for the contemporary reader, where all of this information made sense and helped them place it in the world. But for us, I mean, it can be a fun puzzle to look at all the names and find them in the various sagas and see where they all connect. But it's not necessary to be able to enjoy the story. So I thought in this first section of the story that we have been reading now, there are a few key people that have been introduced to us. Among them are the half-brothers Huskuld and Ruth, which we meet at the very beginning. We also learn that Huskuld has a daughter called Halgjerd, and when we first meet her, she is a child playing on the floor, but Ruth at this point describes her as very beautiful, but she surely will be making men miserable in the future. And if there's one thing we know from sagas, is that any kind of prediction or premonition like this will always come to fruition. It is one of those literary devices of the sagas, that you will have prophecies or just premonitions like this, or dreams or something like that, and whatever is laid out as a possible future will always be the actual future. It's sort of the belief in fate here playing out, perhaps, but it's also just a literary device making the story, the grander scheme of the story, make sense. So yeah, we meet Huskuld and we meet Ruth, we meet Halgjerd. That's the first really important people we are introduced to, and then Ruth is in the process, he wants a wife, and Huskuld suggests this woman called Unn, who's the daughter of a man called Mor. So they go to Mor and asks for her hand, and they make this deal about the marriage, and it's agreed that Ruth and Unn will be married later that summer. But on the way home, Ruth is interrupted by someone coming with news from Norway that his brother there has died and he needs to go there to sort out some inheritance. So he goes back and renegotiates the deal so that instead of them being married now, they will be engaged for 3 years, and Ruth will be able to go to Norway and then come back to her, and she will wait for him. So he goes, he does all kinds of Viking-y things, but he also has a dalliance with the mother of the Norwegian king called Gunhild, and when he leaves to go back to Iceland and be married, she says to him, you know, it's either a curse or just another of these premonitions, but she says to him that I don't think you will be able to perform sexually with your future wife. And again, of course, that is exactly what happens. So Ruth comes home, he does get married to Unn, and they won't have a long and happy life together because they're not getting children. She's not getting satisfied, and eventually she goes to her father and tells her that Ruth is not able to perform sexually with her, and that her father then helps her divorce Ruth. So that's sort of the first bit of it. We also get some insight into Halgjerd, which was Huskuld's daughter, her marriages in plural here, because she is first married to one man called Thorvald, where she has no say in the matter. She's not very happy with this. Also, all the men who tries to marry Halgjerd is advised not to, because she has a reputation for being exceptionally headstrong and ambitious and ill-tempered and just generally not very nice to be around. Yet she's also very beautiful, and she has a powerful and rich father, so men flock to her anyways. So yeah, first off, she is married to Thorvald. That doesn't end very well, because they have an argument, he slaps her, and she has her foster father kill him. So now she's a widow. And the next man who shows up at the door is called Glum, and again he's warned against her, but he says, I'll take my chances. This time around it goes better, but again they have an argument. This time she specifically tells her foster father not to touch her husband, but he still ends up killing him. And so she's twice widowed by now, and having a reputation that's hard to come out of. So that's her part of the story in the beginning. And then we meet Gunnar and then Njål, the title character that has his name on the cover. They are very good friends and have been, but they're also very different people. You have Gunnar, who is sort of this poster boy Viking, who's tall and blonde and muscular and athletic and impossible to beat in a fight. And then you have Njål, which is neither of these things, but instead he's very clever and he has a great knowledge of the law, and he's the kind of person that everybody comes to for advice when they need it. And so they have this close friendship and have had for years when we meet them. And Njål also has a wife called Bergtora, and he has 4 sons, 3 of them legitimate children with Bergtora, and then also another illegitimate son. And we learn later on that he also has 2 daughters. But yeah, that's these people. Then we learn that Gunnar is a relative of Un, and he gets asked to help her get her inheritance from her husband, or at least get money that she feels she's owed from the divorce. So he, with the help of Njål, they manages to do this. And they also manages to do this without actually becoming enemies with Huskuld and Rut. And while doing this, Gunnar now meets Hallgjerd, and now he wants to marry her. Again, advised against it, but he doesn't listen to it, and Hallgjerd agrees to the marriage and comes with him. And this is where everything starts to go wrong for poor Gunnar. Let's put it like that. Because in the summer, when Gunnar is going to Njål and Bergtora, which he usually does in the summer, it's a tradition for them, he brings his new wife, and she and Bergtora does not get along at all. They instantly at each other's throat, and they start a feud where they start killing off each other's servants. Of course, they don't actually do the killing, but they find men to do the killing for them, and this is happening in an escalating pattern. And then Gunnar and Njål are adamant that they want to keep staying friends, and that they trying to make reparations for what their wives are doing. So that's where we're at this point in the story, up until chapter 40. We're here just at the point where things really are starting to escalate in the conflict between these families. I feel like there's many interesting things to look at in this text, and probably we'll be looking into them as we go further as well. Like, one thing I'm always enjoying with reading the sagas is reading these really fierce women. Hallgjerd is definitely one of them. She's got this driving force, and she really makes the men around her do exactly like she wants, except for maybe her last husband, at least up until this point. So yeah, she's very much the instigator of a lot of the things happening here, which is also, let's say, the instigator of the misery that a lot of men is experiencing, just as was prophesied at the very beginning. It's also interesting to see all the little details that this story tells us about society, specifically about marriage, but also the one thing I find most interesting up until this point is all the insights we get into the law system. I know this is something that will be even more prominent later in the story, but I find it fascinating learning about this kind of revenge and the honor system that is behind it, because it is not random who gets killed here, and it is clear from everything that's happening that there is a system, there is a law system happening. So whenever someone actually goes out and kills someone, they don't just kill a person and then try to get away with it. The first thing they do after they have murdered someone is to find the closest other person to the place of the crime and confess, and just say that I did this, this was my doing, because that's part of the point. It's part of the honor system. And then, you know, I think I'm gonna think more about this and talk more about it in the future, but it is this system of checks and balances. And that you know that if you take another person's life, there is an imbalance, and that imbalance can either be fixed by you paying a fine, and that's the value of that fine is sort of set based on who the person you killed was. And at the beginning of the conflict between Halyard and Bergtora, the person that is killed is a slave. So the price is Gunnar has to pay Njål is 12 pieces of silver. And then that's the slave that killed the first slave is killed, and then is imbalanced again, and again the price is set to 12 pieces of silver. And then as it goes along, it becomes a freed man, and the people getting killed are getting more and more important, and the fines are getting higher. But Gunnar and Njål want to keep their friendship, so they keep paying these fines to each other to balance out the thing. And this is something you see again and again and again in various sagas, how this system is. You can't, if someone in your family is killed and you don't either get the money that pays for it, or somebody is killed in retaliation, it's a great shame for your family, and you're looked upon as a weakling or as something, and you don't get that place in society that you want to have. So this is something that's very fascinating, and I know going forward this is going to escalate more and get out of all proportions. So I'm thinking a further discussion of this will come later on. But for today, I think this is what I wanted to say about the actual story that we've been reading. Just before I end this, I just wanted to tell you just a little bit about how I have been reading this, because it's been a special reading experience for me this week. I've been in a kind of a reading slump for a while, and I'm kind of using this to drag myself out of it, and it's working, which is unsurprising to me because this is something I really love reading, so it's perfect to pull me out of a reading slump. But I have two editions of this. I have Njåls Saga in this separate book, which I've had for a very long time. And then I also have this edition, which is a part of a 5-book box set with all of the Icelandic sagas translated into Norwegian for the first time. I mean, obviously Njåls Saga was translated before, but a lot of the shorter ones weren't. So what I discovered is that these two editions, or these two Norwegian translations, are quite different. I was reading like the first page to decide which edition I should be reading, and I noticed several differences, and it made me curious. One of the things that were different was the name of the first person being introduced, because in this one he's called Mor, which is the Norwegian word, current Norwegian word for the animal marten. I had to think about that word, but yeah, the animal marten. So that's Mor, and in this one he's called Mord, which is the current Norwegian word for murder. So clearly these two versions of his name is giving me very different connotations. And so I got curious which one is closest to the original. So I thought the only way to figure that out is to actually read the original. So I went online and found the Old Norse version of Njåls Saga. And clearly, I don't really read Old Norse. It is different enough from Norwegian that it is not really intelligible for me to read. But a lot of the words are kind of similar, so you can get the drift. And particularly when you are, already have read two various translations and then you compare it to the original, you can pick out which words means what to a very large extent. So I found that the original name for this character was Mord. So I thought, okay, then this version is closest with Mord because that's just one letter difference. So this is probably the safest bet for me. But then I thought, well, why not? I do have an Old Norse dictionary lying around because I did one semester of Old Norse at university. So I looked it up, and the word Mord in Old Norse means Martin. So then again, this was probably the closest to the original after all. So yeah, that's just one example, but that's how I spent my Friday evening, properly geeking out, comparing my two translations of Njåls Saga with the original Old Norse that I can't really read. Yeah, we each create our own fun, is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, I'm curious to hear if you have been reading along with us and what your thoughts on the beginning of this saga is, and I hope you found this at least somewhat interesting, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.